The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's IT governance webinar on penetration testing and its role in your GDPR project. I'm Alan Calder. I'm going to be your host today. I'm the founder and executive chairman of IT governance, and joining me today is David Grove, who's the head of our technical services business division at IT governance, and who will be talking through the majority of this webinar on the practical aspects of running penetration testing in a way that will help support GDPR compliance and its very onerous requirements around the protection of personal data. You will already have noticed that you're muted. It's a practical way for us to ensure that background noise doesn't disrupt the experience for everybody else, but it doesn't get in the way of you asking questions. Please, if at any point during this webinar you find that you do have questions to ask, do use the question function. Sitting in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen will be a small box marked questions. You can type into that questions. You can type in their questions as they occur to you, and then when we get to the end of the webinar, in whatever time we have left, we'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can. We'll read the questions out in the order that you've got them in there, and then either David or I will answer the question. So please do feel free to use the question opportunity to pose questions as we go through the project. Very briefly, the background to IT governance and our involvement in what we're doing today is, of course, that as an organization, IT governance has been involved in information security and governance around IT now for about 12 years. In our newly restructured organization, we floated on AIM about 6-7 weeks ago, and we've got a very active technical services and consultancy practice, which we set up some 7 or 8 years ago. And we provide across all of the range of technical security a very significant set of services. We're a CREST member company, which means that in respect of all our penetration testing related services, you can rely on those services being delivered by people with recognized qualifications working in a format that is to a recognized standard. We've got qualified security assessors. We're a formally appointed PCI QSA. We are a Cyber Essentials certification body. So across all of the key areas of what you might call the technical aspects of security risk, we've got a well-established offering of services, but they exist in a world not only of technical security services. We recognize that technical security is one manifestation of an organization's drive to improve its overall protection of its key corporate assets and its compliance with data protection regulation. So part of what I'm going to be talking about today is really the testing challenges that organizations have when we look at GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Many organizations think of it as being a set of requirements which are primarily around is there a proper lawful basis for processing, what's our data retention period, and related matters. But it is, of course, also a law that requires organizations to take appropriate steps to protect personal data and to be able to demonstrate that they've taken those steps. So penetration testing, making sure that attackers can't find their way into your network, or if they're within your physical environment, they can't get onto devices or can't get at the storage space for personal data, is a key part of making sure that your GDPR compliance is effective. So the specific security testing requirements of GDPR, how do those apply to your organization? And what would the scope be for vulnerability scans and penetration testing? How do you make sure that you've worked out a way, given that for many organizations, penetration testing is likely to have been something that you've not done or not done much of. How can you do this in a way that will be cost effective and relatively easy to understand and to deploy the learnings from to improve organizational security? So during today, we're going to be talking about both of those things: how to identify the appropriate testing scope, how best to carry out tests that will fit within your security and budgetary requirements. And we're going to have a look, obviously, therefore, at the detailed requirements of GDPR in order to get the context right. But you have to think about GDPR in the context of cybercrime. The data protection regulation comes into existence because of the extent to which attackers are successful in accessing personal data. Of course, not only attackers, there are many other ways in which data gets used or abused. It gets accessed by insiders. It gets used in ways that data subjects don't want you to. But today we're really looking at the accessing of data by unauthorized individuals, whether they're insiders or outsiders, and the extent to which, therefore, organizations need to be dealing with that in order to meet the requirements of GDPR. If you have a look at the recent survey from the UK's Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the cybersecurity breaches survey published in April last year said that 23% of the respondents to the survey had had a temporary loss of files, 20% had their software or their systems corrupted, 10% a permanent loss or change of data, all the way down to 6% of organizations. This is respondents, remember, not everybody. Who had money, assets, or intellectual property stolen. 46% of UK businesses identified that they had had a security breach or attack in the last 12 months. And frankly, if you look at security surveys, you'll find that this is probably a middle of the road to conservative estimate. In other words, it doesn't pick up the full volume of breaches which occur. There are other surveys which would suggest the situation is significantly more alarming than these results suggest. Now, for most organizations, in looking at the results of cyber breach surveys, you tend to think of cyber breaches being things brought about by attackers focused on high-profile targets who want to break into the Ministry of Defense or into a bank. And the reality is, it's not that at all. The reality is that something like 80% of data breaches are brought about by relatively inexperienced attackers who are deploying software which they may have rented or downloaded for free from the internet, and they are deploying it to search out and find vulnerabilities. Remember that vulnerabilities are all listed on public websites, so it's not that very hard to know what vulnerabilities are, particularly not what the most common vulnerabilities are. And so attackers run software, they run phishing emails, they run vulnerability scans designed to look for vulnerabilities. They don't really worry about who's got them, because the next step after you find a vulnerability is to exploit it. And once you've exploited it, to then have a look around inside the target and see what there is that's worth stealing. And of course, to many organizations, to many criminal organizations, the reality is that stealing £5,000 or £10,000 from 100 organizations is probably a whole lot simpler than stealing £500,000 from just 10 organizations apiece, because smaller organizations might not notice it, they don't have the resources to respond, and that makes cybercrime a very lucrative and effective way for criminals to progress. Most organized criminals have well-established cybercrime networks now. Most organized crime uses the internet in one way or another, whether it's to traffic humans or to carry out criminal activities. So the internet is an area in which all organizations need to be particularly concerned. And over the years, a range of regulations and standards have emerged to try and protect consumers, individuals, from the ravages of criminals. The Data Protection Directive, which in the UK became the Data Protection Act in 1998, has of course been around for nearly 20 years now in different forms. It's existed across the European Union. It's a relatively simple act. Its most significant component is the reality that the fines for breaching it for a long time didn't exist. They're not native to the law. They depend on other legislation to enable laws to be, fines to be levied. In the UK, the maximum fine for an egregious breach at the moment is £500,000. The Data Protection Act is being replaced by the General Data Protection Regulation on the 25th of May, so we have some 23 days left to the day on which it's enforced. We're in the 24th month of a 2-year transition period, and the reality is that many organizations have not yet even started on their journey to compliance. Those who have are mostly coming to the end and will be in a position, should be in a position to know that their data, the data they collect and process will be secure in just over 3 weeks' time. So the data protection regulation, of course, brings with it fines which for acts of gross negligence could go up to 4% of global turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is the higher. Do bear in mind that's a maximum. It's not likely that organizations will be realizing those fines early on. And in fact, fines may not be levied for a number of months after the 25th of May, because organizations first have to be found in breach, have to be investigated. All of those issues have to be dealt with. Alongside data protection, the payment card industry published a standard to deal with the security of payment card data. This is not a law other than in 3 or 4 states in the USA. It's a contractual requirement. It's enforced by the payment brands, Visa, Access, Visa, MasterCard, JCB, and so on. And it's enforced through acquiring banks on merchants. It's patchily enforced. Some banks are very determined to make sure it's applied rigorously. Others don't try so hard. But the logic of it is that it's a set of very specific, detailed technical controls that should protect cardholders from the theft of their data. Alongside these 2 laws, the international standard ISO IEC 27001 emerged from what used to be BS 7799, and it sets out a specification for the protection of data, of information of any sort, whether it's intellectual property, financial information, or personal data. And it's a standard against which an organization can be audited in the same way as you can be audited against the PCI DSS. So it's a specification. Other legislation that deals in a more focused way with personal data in the financial sector, there's PSD2, the Second Payment Service Directive, which requires organizations to take steps to protect customers from fraud and from the illegal use of their sensitive and personal data. PSD2 is in the process of becoming effective right now. In the financial sector, again, the New York Department of Financial Services passed a law 18 months or so ago requiring organizations based in New York to comply with that set of regulations or face significant fines. And in the health sector, also in the US, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, has for a long time dealt in an ever more fearsome way with organizations operating in the covered healthcare sector to ensure that their the protection of individuals' health data, and of course its portability, so that you should be able to move it from one provider to another, is managed in accordance with the regulation. So we've had a significant growth in the range of laws which are designed to ensure that individuals' data is protected. And in GDPR in particular, which is a 100-odd clause regulation which comes into effect across the whole of the EU, there are 2 articles in particular which are important from an encryption and security point of view. The first is Article 32, which requires controllers and processors, these are specifically defined terms, who are processing the data of EU residents, irrespective of nationality, if you're outside the European Union or if you're inside the European Union, irrespective of nationality or place of residence, to a level of security appropriate to the risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And Article 35 requires you to carry out an assessment of the impact on any planned processing operations on the protection of personal data. So the types of measures which organizations are already expected to put in place is encryption of personal data at rest and in flight, making sure that processing systems are resilient, being able to store availability and access within a reasonable time frame. So if you have a cybersecurity attack which knocks your systems down for 24 hours, that would be a breach of GDPR, and requires you to have a process for regularly testing, assessing, and evaluating the effectiveness of your technical and organizational measures for ensuring security. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you have a process and you regularly test. It's a simple way of saying you have to have penetration testing. So in thinking about how you're going to comply with the requirements of Article 32, you've got to start off by recognizing that the regulation itself is a little bit vague in its terminology. It's very all-encompassing. So it says taking into account the state of the art, the costs of implementation, and the nature, scope, purposes of processing, and so on, and the risk of varying likelihoods to the data of data subjects. You've got to put appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. So you've got to work out what data and infrastructure you're assessing. What personal data have you got? Where is it held? This is typically done through some form of data inventory, data flow map, or data flow audit. You've then got to look at the potential risks to the data subject. What might the impact be? If there's low or no risk, the good news is that you won't be mandated to report that to the Information Commissioner. If there is a risk, you have to, by law, report that to the ICO. And if it's a high risk, you also have to report it to the data subject. So clearly, you're going to have a mechanism for assessing risk, a risk assessment framework within which to do it. And you've got to recognize that there is always going to be risk. The cost of eliminating all risk may be disproportionate to the state of the risk, and GDPR recognizes that. It doesn't say eliminate all risk, it says eliminate risk so that the risk you're taking is proportionate to so the security is going to be proportionate to the risk that you're exposing data subjects to. I think this is probably a good point at which we might think about the actual testing. So I'm going to hand over now to David Grove, who's going to talk about the various ways in which you can carry out the testing that you need to do, recognizing that having identified what data you've got, done a risk assessment and decided on the sensible form of risk treatment, there's going to be a range of scanning and testing that you need to carry out. So let me hand you over to David. He will take you on and talk in some more detail on this topic.
Thank you, Alan. Hopefully everybody can now see my screen there and hear me. That handover has gone smoothly. Thank you. So we've established then that in order to be compliant with GDPR, you need to do a degree of pen testing. And a number of our clients will come to us and say, I know I need to pen test, just pen test everything. And what we're proposing is that pen test everything isn't a very cost-effective solution to your issues, and it isn't very proportionate to the risks that Alan was talking about earlier. And it is very important that that your expenditure there is proportional to the risk that you might be exposing your business to. So we're going to have a look at what testing might be appropriate, what you should be testing, and how you should be testing it, and perhaps how frequently you should be testing it. But first of all, I just wanted to clarify some terms, because in talking to our clients, we get a lot of misunderstandings about what the difference is between a vulnerability scan and a pen test. And it's really important to understand that difference so that you know what you're buying and you know what results to expect and what the implications of those results are. So vulnerability scanning is essentially an automated process. There are a number of tools out on the market that anybody can get their hands on, either free or to purchase, and they will give you typically a list of of known vulnerabilities that will say your server may or may not be running this piece of software which has this vulnerability. You may or may not have this risk of exposure, and they require a degree of competence and skill to actually look through and identify, first of all, is that a false positive? Do I really run that piece of software on that device? Does it really have that vulnerability? And then also assess what the implications of that vulnerability are. Could it really be exploited, and what data might be at risk if you was to be exploited? And vulnerability scanning is a really useful tool. There's no denying it. It's very cost effective, and it's very good for identifying those high levels of vulnerabilities and where they might be. But it can give you a false sense of security, that you think, oh, I've got no critical or high vulnerabilities, therefore I'm secure. The reality is quite different, though, that an attacker can combine different vulnerabilities that might be identified and use them to leverage further access to the network and ultimately gain access to the sensitive or personal data that you're trying to protect. Penetration testers will also identify things that are beyond a vulnerability scanner. So, for example, where passwords are being stored or transmitted in clear text, or where server configuration or custom applications are allowing for data to be compromised through vulnerabilities that they have. So, in summary, a vulnerability scan is very much a default automated process. A pen test will simulate the actual actions of an attacker in gathering information and in attacking your network, and allow you to make a much more informed decision about where you should be addressing the issues in your applications, your networks. So, having a look at how pen testing works. There is a degree of vulnerability scanning, and we call that part of our reconnaissance phase. That will also include looking at maybe some social media around your company, doing some research on LinkedIn, looking at employee profiles. There can be a whole range of things that will be in the scope for a pen tester to assess what might be a form of weakness into your organization or into your databases. The test itself can be a range of technical tests, so exploiting some of those vulnerabilities. I'm sure lots of people will have heard of SQL injection, where you can manipulate SQL commands to gain access to data, or maybe cross-site scripting, where you can lead users down blind alleys and onto rogue websites that might contain malware for them to download. Or that penetration testing could use techniques such as social engineering. And a common example that we do with a number of our clients is we run phishing tests with them. So, simulating a phishing email that might have a link to a piece of malware or a malicious website, and assessing how many employees in the organization are willing to click those links, download that malware, and potentially expose the organization to attack. Physical social engineering is another area that we'll cover within pen testing, and where we'll actually try and gain physical access to buildings. So, how secure is your front door reception area? Are people only too happy to do the obliging, helpful thing and let guests through and give them access to phone ports and network ports, and in doing so, again, compromising organizations? So, all of these things can be tested through that pen testing process, way far and above over what you would expect from a vulnerability scanner. Here at IT Governance, we've set out what we believe to be a unique approach to pen testing, in that as well as vulnerability scanning and pen testing, we've made a further degree of distinction and said we should distinguish between a level 1 pen test and a level 2 pen test. And the key distinction there is that a level 1 pen test will only look to identify vulnerabilities. So, it will be a vulnerability scan plus some manual testing, and looking to identify potential ways that your vulnerability could be, so your organization could be vulnerable to attack. Within a level 2 test, we will look to exploit those vulnerabilities and be able to demonstrate, because of these issues we found, we could download your entire client database, or we could get access to someone else's data within the system. And we believe that those different levels of testing have a very different business model, and in actual fact, for the vast majority, up to 80% of organizations, a level 1 test for a lot of their systems is perfectly adequate and will protect you from some of the people that Alan talked about earlier, the script kiddies, as we call them in the business, who download tools from the internet and are just going out scanning, looking for potentially vulnerable systems. A level 1 test, if you resolve the issues identified in there, then you'll stay below their radar, and they won't come looking for any goodies that might be stored behind your defenses. Level 2, we're really looking at organizations who might be prone to a specific attack because of the industry sector they work in, or because of the data that they might be holding. You know, they might have much more skilled attackers, state-sponsored or hacktivists, or people who've got a particular reason why they're going after these systems or these organizations. So in making this distinction, we've also been able to simplify the sales process as well. And in fact, a level 1 pen test you can buy off the shelf from our web shop, fixed price, and we will either come out or from our own offices be able to test your applications or network. It's a remarkably simple sales process. For the level 2 testing, we will do a scoping call and collect some more data, perhaps have a demo of your web application. Still a relatively simple process, and that will enable us to give an accurate assessment of how much effort it will be and what the cost will be for assessing those systems. I always like an analogy, and the one I use to help people distinguish between the different types of testing that we offer is to think of a vulnerability assessment is, think of a house burglar. So a vulnerability assessment is the burglar walking down the street. They'll walk past a number of houses and they'll make a note of who's got some open windows or who doesn't have some lights on at night, where there might be a potential target. With a level 1 pen test, we'll take that knowledge and we'll combine it with a bit of extra reconnaissance. So maybe that your house is always empty at certain times because you're at work or you go out. And the tester will have a look through the windows and see what opportunities there might be to compromise the valuables inside your house. This level of testing gives you a much more comprehensive assessment over a vulnerability scan. A level 2 pen test, though, the tester will actually go through those open windows, gain access to the property. They'll look around for further vulnerabilities within the system. So maybe finding the safe that's behind the picture above the mantelpiece. They would use some social media to find when you posted pictures of your birthday party, work out your birthday, find that's the key to the safe, and therefore show a proof of concept of how you could be relieved of all the assets within your safe there. So when we're thinking about pen testing and compliance with GDPR, it's perhaps useful to think of some other standards that are out there that have been touched on previously in this presentation. And one we're looking at here is the public sector network IT health check. So this is a health check which combines vulnerability scanning, pen testing, and a number of other tests that any organisation that wishes to connect to the UK government's public sector network have to perform in order to prove that there can't be any unauthorised entry onto the public services network. It looks at the internal systems and how they should be tested to show that there's no significant weaknesses on the internal network, so that any rogue employee or anybody who got access to the internal network would only have limited access and be able to cause limited impact. And it looks at external testing as well to make sure anybody outside of that network who doesn't need access to the PSN can't force their way through other systems and find a route in. It's not uncommon when we do pen testing that we'll go and access someone's guest Wi-Fi and be able to find a route onto their corporate network and through their wireless and network infrastructure, and be able to access critical systems just from sitting in a car in the car park, having been given the password to the guest Wi-Fi. So looking at some of the areas that you should be testing, we tend to split these up around the internal and an external network. External network testing is looking at what can that attacker gain from the outside. So this can either be from an authenticated or unauthenticated perspective. So for example, an unauthenticated attack is somebody who has no knowledge of your organization, no accounts, and is just looking to find a way in. The authenticated user might be if they're a home user, or a partner or supplier of yours who has access to some of your infrastructure. What can they access beyond the remit and that you would expect to be as part of their regular duties? Internal network testing looks at once somebody has got into the network, either physically because they're an employee, or they've broken into your office, or they're the air conditioning contractor has got access to your network. What could they potentially get access to once they've actually broken through that boundary layer and got access to within your network? And we'll do a degree of testing there to make sure that both employees can only access the data that they need to do their jobs, and that anybody with rogue access can't get too far, and can limit the impact of any disruption that they can choose. I've also touched on web application testing. So many of you will have public websites with applications that host databases of your client data or personal data to them. And this is a separate type of attack, or separate type of testing rather, where we can actually test the logic that's been encoded in those applications. And these are typically built by in-house or contract development teams. So every application is going to be different. They might rely on an SQL database that could be accessed by trying to force some of the logic in the code and making the code behave in a way that the developer hadn't really considered when they were coding. And the application test will allow us to exploit some of those vulnerabilities that the developer may have inadvertently introduced. I also touched on earlier some of the social engineering testing, and the report that Alan referred to earlier, the Verizon data breach report, found that 66% of malware linked to data breaches was ransomware that had been installed by malicious email attachments. So this is a very common and increasingly common means of attackers accessing organizations, getting access to their networks, and retrieving data. And we've all seen the Malawian prince who's got some inheritance for you, and we're all fairly aware of those sort of attacks, but the emails are getting a lot more sophisticated now, and a lot harder to spot. But there are still some key signs that people can look out for, and by running simulated phishing attacks, we can help to educate employees to say these are the things you need to be considering when you're receiving emails. And by regularly running those, combined with a training program around the implications of social engineering and how to spot either threat actors or malicious emails, combining the testing with an education program can really help to improve the security culture of your organization and reduce the likelihood of any breaches. So choosing the right test. So really, we would ask that have a look at what you've got, what the assets are, where that sensitive data, the personal data, is being stored, what systems might have access to it. And as with any of you who are familiar with the payment card industry data security standard, or any other of the security controls, actually reducing the scope of who and which systems have access to data is one of the key things that you can do to help prevent that data. And we will often find when we do PCI audits that although the scope might be quite tightly defined and there's a fully encrypted, hardened database that only a few people have access to, that restricts people doing their work. And so they then go and download into a spreadsheet, which they'll then email to their colleagues, and that will then contain some personal data, and the data can leak out of those environments. So the testing can help you ascertain where the boundary of those environments are and where this personal data is around your organization. Once you've identified those, then it's looking at where you require internal or external testing, and where you require web application testing. And thinking back to some of the level 1, level 2 testing that we're talking about, often it can just be quite acceptable for the boundary of an organization. Let's just do a level 1 test. Let's make sure we're aware of the vulnerabilities. Let's keep our head below the parapet, and let's focus our effort and our resource on a level 2 test of a really tight, small subset of the systems that are really critical to our business, or really hold some sensitive data, be it personal data, client data, payment cards, whatever it is that you're holding within that organization. So by getting the scope right and looking at what systems have access, which people have access, what access do they need to do their jobs, we can really help to limit the amount of testing that is required and make sure that you're getting the maximum return on that testing that you're doing. And then again, should you be considering social engineering tests if you're in an organization that's regularly printing data, and that's a key part of your process flow, and there's a lot of paperwork lying around, or you're an organization where there's a lot of external parties involved because perhaps you're in a shared office, or because you just have a lot of visitors or clients coming in, then social engineering tests can really help to enhance the awareness of people and make it part of your regular process. That nobody really likes to challenge people and say, who are you, what are you supposed to be here? But actually it's an acceptable thing to do, and we should be encouraging people to do it. And so making that part of the culture, that it's really accepted and encouraged within an organization, by reinforcing that with some social engineering testing, can really help to build up that culture and that awareness within. So how much testing should you be doing? Our general recommendation is vulnerability scanning as often as possible, as often as practical for your organization. So this can either be monthly or quarterly, perhaps, looking at internal and external vulnerability scans. If necessary, if you don't have the resource in-house, then we can provide a qualified tester to help you review those scan results. Excuse me, and making sure that that you're able to focus on the priority outputs. We'd also recommend that you vulnerability scan whenever you do a significant change to infrastructure or applications. So for example, rolling out some new hardware or a significant website upgrade. The vulnerability scan is quick, it's easy, and will give you an initial degree of comfort that you have no significant vulnerabilities in there. Pen testing, then we would normally expect this to be on an annual basis. We do have a number of clients who will do it more frequently for some particularly mission critical systems that they have with particularly sensitive data. But usually annual is sufficient for most. And again, the level 1 test is really suitable for the vast majority of organizations who are looking to protect themselves and just keep their heads below the radar from the opportunist attacker and the people who might be just scanning the internet looking for some easy targets to make that quick few bucks. The level 2, we're looking for protection from really specific targeted attacks for particular industry sectors or mission critical systems. Segmenting your network is probably something that you've heard of, the ability to split your internal network into different areas. So segmenting anything with personal data away from access for the rest of it. Part of your testing can be to ensure that segmentation is effective and preventing access, and you can't jump from one network to the other. And we would recommend that as part of that annual pen testing regime. And finally, the social engineering and phishing tests. Phishing tests, I think the anecdote is little and often. Keep feeding the emails in, keep people on their toes and make them aware that you are doing phishing testing. Make it almost a game to see who can spot the phishing emails. It will really encourage people that when they do get a genuine phishing attack, that they won't be scared to report it, and they're always on their toes and expecting it. And also the physical access as well, making it part of the culture that people should be prepared to challenge strangers. They should be prepared to not just accept that somebody has a right of access just because they happen to be within the building. So once you've done your pen testing, then any good pen test will result in a report, and we try to do at IT Governance is make sure that those reports give you a really firm view of not just what the vulnerabilities were, but what the potential business impact of those vulnerabilities might be, to help you to prioritize where it is you need to fix. As Alan mentioned earlier, nobody's suggesting that you can get rid of all the risk, and a good pen test report will allow you to really focus on the areas, the quick fixes that might get you a reasonable rate of return and a reasonable risk reduction, and some of the bigger fixes that will really make a difference, and help you to decide where to spend your security budget later on. So your pen testing report will cover the scope of what was tested. Really important part of this is, it's important to identify which websites did we actually test, which ones have got vulnerabilities, which ones have been out of the scope of the testing and may need some future work. What testing was performed, so what types of tests did we do? Network testing, application testing, segmentation testing, what tests were included in there, what we were testing for, what sort of vulnerabilities, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. So you will get a breakdown of that within your report. Obviously, a list of the actual issues uncovered, and that won't just be a sort of unformatted vulnerability scan output. You will actually get something that's been manually written to say these are the issues that we identified, this is how we prioritize them in terms of the criticality and the risk that they pose to your organization, and then also obviously a method of resolution and how you can remediate those issues within your organization. And we will also provide some general advice on other things that we might find as we are performing the pen test. So if we find that there's a culture within the organization that people are very willing to divulge potentially sensitive data, or share it in clear text emails, or send around spreadsheets, or store sensitive information in clear text within servers, that not specifically part of the test, but things that we found throughout the course of that testing that we believe could potentially cause a further exposure to your organization. To give you an idea, just before I wrap up, on a typical test, so over the last 12 months, these are the sort of vulnerability numbers that we find. So we will often find between 2 and 3 critical vulnerabilities. So these are vulnerabilities where an attacker could gain full control over the system or application, and either render it unusable or gain full access to the data behind it. High is where one user can access data that is the possession, or is another user's data. So, for example, we've all seen recently, I'm sure, the TSB banking issues, where there was a vulnerability in their release where users could actually see the account data for other account holders within the bank. So these we classed as high risk vulnerabilities, and throughout the course of the test, any criticals that we find, we will notify you immediately. We won't wait 10 days for the report to come out. We'll say, you've got this issue, we really think you ought to look at getting it fixed immediately. Highs, we will talk to you about throughout the test, and talk to you about what the remediation action might be, either in a wash-up call at the end of the day or at the end of the test, depending on what we've pre-agreed with you as being the preferred mode of communication. Medium and lows, then obviously less risk to the organization, but we'll still provide remediation action and advice on how much you should, on what risk they're exposing you to. And if we do find anything that a vulnerability scanner might rate as a medium, but we were able to use it in combination with another vulnerability, then we will upgrade those. We'll push them up the list to highs or criticals, so that you've got a full, clear summary of where you need to focus your remediation efforts. Okay, so just to summarize on the pen testing side, Article 32 of the GDPR requires organizations to implement technical measures and some testing programs, and our recommendation is to look at the systems that might be storing personal data. First of all, implement some measures to protect those systems, to reduce the scope, to reduce the access to that data, and then test the boundaries to that, and test internally once someone gets in within that system, what can they do? And by combining some vulnerability scanning, regular vulnerability scanning with annual level 1 and level 2 testing as appropriate for those different systems, then you can get a much greater return for your investment on pen testing and a much greater view of where it is that you need to be fixing your the issues that you've got to get the maximum return for your investment. So I think at that point I'm going to hand back to Alan, who might just have a little summary, and then we'll be opening up for any questions. Okay, I'm going to pick up some of the questions here. So working back through, did you say penetration testing is mandatory for all business sizes or optional? So I think as Alan covered there, the pen testing is, as part of the GDPR compliance, you need to be able to show that you are testing, and defining the level of testing is something that you should do as part of your GDPR compliance project, and demonstrating that you are taking measures to remediate some of those actions and fix the issues. Okay, I think we're just getting lots of. Would you warn staff that you intend to carry out pen testing before sending emails with fake viruses? Initially, I would say let's do the phishing test without warning people and see what sort of response rate you get. But then I think it's very good that the people know that there is some phishing testing going on. It makes them much more suspicious of other emails that they might see, and generally increases their awareness. So I'd say get an initial benchmark. Don't tell people that you're doing phishing testing, and then push out that testing later on. Can you repeat the difference between test and pen test? So I think that's looking at vulnerability scanning. And a vulnerability scan is basically an automated scan of a system which will identify some default vulnerabilities that are in there, perhaps out-of-date software versions. Level 1 pen testing is a combination of vulnerability scanning and manual scanning, which will give you a full verified list of all the vulnerabilities that we can identify. And look at how they might be exploitable. Level 2 pen testing is a full exploitation of those vulnerabilities and gaining access to a system, and in doing so, maybe identifying further vulnerabilities such as clear text data that's stored within a database that could be easily exploited and used to gain access to further systems if there were passwords or user credentials, for example, stored in clear text. How often should you do the pen testing? So I think one of the things we talked about in the slide was pen testing, vulnerability scanning monthly or maybe quarterly, and certainly annual pen testing, maybe even more often for any critical systems that you have. But again, the important thing there is to get the distinction between your level 1 testing and your level 2 testing. Around teaching around knowledge of an information security and GDPR, we do provide a number of training modules that are available as online training modules, or we can run in-house training courses, and these can be accessible to any of our clients. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the website there and look at some of the training content that we have, and say either online or delivered by an instructor, to increase the level of awareness. And this can include anything from GDPR to phishing awareness to PCI DSS, ISO 27000. We can cover a whole range of topics within that training. The key steps to securing personal data. So the first thing for me is to identify what data you have and where it's held and who has access to it, and looking at that from a business perspective. So who needs the access, what access do they need, and then tying that scope down so that that data is only stored on systems and accessed by users who really need it. So really reduce the scope. Then you can start looking at testing, so can anyone from outside of that scope get access, and then you can then start looking at testing internally, and can anybody from who has access already has access to the systems access data that they shouldn't be able to get access to. There are obviously a whole road of other things to look at. So what data should be encrypted? If you are storing card data, there are some very strict rules within PCI about what data can be stored and for how long it can be stored. Either the pan on the front must be stored encrypted, but the 3-digit code on the back of the card can't be stored at all. So there are some very strict rules there about data storage and encryption. PCI isn't a bad starting point. If you replace all the references to card data in there and replace it with personal data I want to protect, then you've not got a bad starting point for a protection regime. And the other thing I would look at as well is what data you actually store, and do you need to store it? What is the business purpose for storing that data? By default, people start collecting names, addresses, dates of birth, job titles, etc., etc. But what data do you actually need to store? And if there isn't a business reason for it, just get rid of it, and then you no longer have that issue. So we have a question there. When you test, you also do phishing phone calls. Yes, that is a service we can offer. We've operated with a number of clients where we've contacted organisations and attempted to get them to reveal either information about their organisation, such as the software they use or the systems they've got, or personal information about some of their clients or employees. So yes, that can be part of our service. Yes, we will be sending the slides out following this following this webinar, so you'll be able to see copies of those slides as well. So someone's asked, how much of a risk does penetration testing pose to the integrity and availability of a live database or user data? So all of our testers are well experienced and practiced in attempting to maintain the integrity. Obviously, we cannot be responsible if there are issues and applications respond in ways that we didn't expect. But usually, these are certainly very few and far between. If there is a risk to a system, we would always suggest doing a degree of testing on any backup or development systems you might have, and then if there are any differences between those test systems and your live production systems, then doing a subset of the tests on that in that production environment. So we're just testing what's different and reducing the scope of that testing. Testing in a live environment can have its risks. We can do out of hours testing if that's something that people are more comfortable with. But yes, we would always suggest as part of your good business policy anyway, you've got backups of systems and backup systems themselves just in case there are any issues. But in reality, I'm struggling to think of a test this year where we've caused any issues on production data. Okay, I think I've picked up most of the questions there, and we're towards the end of the hour now. So apologies if there was a little glitch there in the audio or the visuals for any of you. Hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear now, and we're resolved. And yes, thank you for your time and listening to this webinar. We will be sending out the slides later, so thank you again for your time, and I look forward to hearing back from many of you who've got any further questions.